You called? This is the gospel is the classic story of the first apostles being called to follow Jesus. And as I'm listening to the door and realizing that Andrew is coming, Andrew is one of these apostles. So we have Jesus who's down by the Sea of Galilee, and who's at the Sea of Galilee but people who are the fishermen. And he calls Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He calls them, and I'm using that word because in today's world we have answering machines. I remember I went to Champlain College Business School way back in the 60s, and I remember one of my fellow students said, I'm going to be working for a company that's making answering machines. And I thought, answering machines? Why would anyone want a machine to answer the telephone? And of course, today, we couldn't do without it. Don't we really wish for an answering machine for God's call? Because when that call comes, the answer is not clear. In fact, the answer to God's call is so difficult that we often don't hear it. The truth is, we hear what we're listening for. Now, if I had a pile of coins in my hand and I jiggled them, there would be a sound that would be very familiar. When we hear a baby crying, I don't know if you're all like me, probably not, but when I hear a baby crying, I want to solve the problem. Not because I don't want to hear the noise, but because it speaks to my heart. When we hear the birds singing, if we hear the birds singing. I don't know how many of you can remember Robert J. Lertzma. He had a wonderful radio program. I loved his voice. And every morning, if you wanted to be awoken by birds singing, that's how he began his program. And I would be lying there sleeping, and you'd hear ding, 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 ding. And it was so much nicer than get up. But we have to be listening. We have to be listening. So, what's the problem? Why do we lack the ears to hear? And I suggest it's because we have so much noise in our lives. And we have machines to answer for us. Hey, God, you called? Why me? It's hard for us. Peter, Andrew, James, and John answered Jesus, and they followed. And one of the things that's not said, but is assumed, is they followed together. Because they knew that Jesus meant good news and cures for people's sickness. Recently, I read an article by the Dean of Berkeley Divinity School about our churches and the decline of our churches of attendance. And he says this: our challenges are as followers of Jesus and leaders of communities are not simple, and and the answers are not obvious. More obvious is that our church needs livelier conversations locally, nationally, and globally to grasp the new identity being thrust on us by the decline, not just in numbers, but of easy alliances with the status quo. Courage is required to answer God's call. I would love to have a transcript of the conversation between Jesus, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. James and John left their father. I mean, poor dad is there, they're fixing the nets, and and the word in the gospel is immediately left to follow Jesus. But there must have been a conversation. They must have said, well, we have to go with this guy, Jesus, because he's curing people and life is going to be better following him. And the father must have said, yes, but we have to earn a living. How are we going to eat? And that's our conversation. That's our conversation, each and every one of us. If we want to hear God calling, we need to tune in. We need to believe in God and in our own power and our own value. People don't come into our lives by accident. Peter, Andrew, James, and John worked together. We are a community here. We work together. Every person that we meet every day is an opportunity to answer God's call. To turn off the noise, to turn off the machine, and to put ourselves on the line with courage, following Jesus, making our creation better, making our world a better place, a more loving place, a more quiet place, a more wonderful and soft and comforting place. We don't live in isolation. We live in community. We live in a society among others, and others are suffering. And we have an obligation to one another to bring others to the comfort and love of God, because God called us. Because we too are here to cure the sick, the poor, the dispossessed, to care for our creation, for the world that we have begun to destroy. We are called, yes, today, to join Jesus, to answer God's call, to become makers of health and wholeness and joy. And that is the good news. We are called to a different leader, to a different kind of leadership, which requires us to have wisdom, sensitivity, and above all, ears to hear the cry of the heart in this, our sometimes heartless land. Amen.